And another exciting thing is we have gotten permission this summer to allow our artists to hold demos at the downtown gallery during the summer months, spring and summer, whenever the weather's nice and the doors are open and people are out in downtown Cartersville. We want some excitement and we want people to see artists in action. And there's no criteria other than you know how to smile and be kind to people who ask too many questions or a lot of questions, I should say. So, it's kind of, there's no set formula. It's if you want to come and do a demo for an hour and a half or 2 hours, or even just, do a little talk about your work. So we thought that would be a really great opportunity for our BAG members to get some visibility and also to create some more excitement at the downtown gallery. So more information coming up about that. I want to remind everyone as well that we have three means of communications in terms of what's happening with our guild. We have our newsletter, which anyone and everyone can sign up for on our website. You don't have to be a BAG member. Anybody that wants to keep track of what we're doing can sign up and you will get those monthly emails, sometimes more than once a month. We have a Facebook page where we always list our happenings. And then you can also go to our website. So that's why we have the website, because that hosts our information of upcoming exhibits, important dates, and things like that. So if you feel like you're not in the know, you have three ways to find out what's going on. If you feel like you didn't get the newsletter, please check your trash or your junk mail, because we really do keep on top of that. And we hope that you'll utilize those three things before calling and saying, I didn't know. So with that being said, welcome everyone. And I'm so excited. Where did she go? There she is, right there. I hope you do. I'll read a little slow. How's that? I'll do you a little favor. In part because, small print and old eyes. Okay, Michelle Dunaway. We are thrilled to have Michelle Dunaway here with us tonight. And since you put your date of birth, I'm presuming you want me to share that. Okay, great. I looked at this. I thought, God, I could have babysat her. Born in 1972, she's an internationally known American artist whose paintings are revered for their bold brushwork, yet sensitive portrayal of emotions that capture the human experience. Dunaway's paintings have been exhibited in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles, and her work has won awards and honors in the Portrait Society of America's International Portrait Competition 2010, 2014, 2016, 2017, 2018, 22, 24. Is that it? Is that all? Jeez, get busy. Dunaway's artwork has been featured in numerous publications, including International Artist, Fine Art Connoisseur, American Artist, Southwest Art, Art of the West, and American Art Collector, along with inclusion in several art books. Dunaway's paintings are highly sought after by distinguished collectors and displayed in prominent collections throughout the U.S. and in Europe. Quote, "To me," she says, "the extraordinary resides in the everyday moments of life. Those moments when we stop, pay attention, and feel gratitude. All of us experience such moments, and they transform us for the better. These instances of human life, personal reflection, and inspiration are what I love to capture and paint." Tonight's presentation, I'll just go ahead and read what you sent, just to kind of prime the mood here, prime the room. The topic is the power of rhythms in nature and harnessing the beauty of those rhythmical elements to create a compelling work of art. Through her slide presentation, Michelle will discuss the essential rhythms that are present in the portrait and throughout the natural world. To compose a compelling work of art, the artist's intention is paramount, and the technical aspects of painting must align with that intention, as well as capturing the essential nature of the subject. All visual matter is composed of naturally occurring rhythms within their structure, and recognizing this is the guiding key factor in how to proceed through the creation of a painting, be it a portrait, landscape, still life, or wildlife. Often, as artists, we become enchanted with so many details within our subject that we can get off course and lose track of the essential nature of what we are painting while attempting to just paint everything well. In this presentation, we will discuss how to recognize the essential rhythms in your subject, problem solve throughout your painting, and maximize this very important and impactful visual element that exists in all of nature within great works of art. Michelle, I'll let you determine when you'd like people to ask questions. If you'd like to, when you're giving your presentation, if you'd like to stop and allow for questions, or if you'd rather wait till the end, it's up to you, okay? So with that, help me welcome Michelle Dunaway.
Hi everyone, just give us a moment to get hooked up. And can you guys hear me okay with the mic? Good. I was losing my voice a little bit. I just got done teaching a 4-day workshop over at the booth. Okay. I'm so glad you're here because I'm so bad at this stuff.
It may flicker a couple times in the beginning, but I promise it will work.
Okay. Then should I turn it sideways to get it full screen? Okay. That's my modernist period, Caleb. So I'm not sure how to get it full screen on, so it's not small. Oh, here we go. Wait. I think I got it. Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm assuming, how many people here are artists? Okay, everyone. Good. Okay, you're my people. We love collectors too, but I'm going to get into some technical stuff that'll be most appealing to artists. So rhythms. It's something that I teach often in my classes. And again, forgive my voice, it's a little quaky, those of you that know me. But it's something I teach often because when I learned about it, it was revelatory to me. I had first heard about it from artist Morgan Weisling, prominent Western artist many of you are probably familiar with. He was a mentor of mine early on, and I guess it was, 25 years ago, I was taking a painting of mine for him to critique at his studio, and I had repainted the eye like 3 times, and I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And he said, the eye is drawn perfectly. And I was like, no, it doesn't look right. He said, it's a rhythm problem. It's not an eye problem. Now, I had been to art school. I had taken some workshops. And I was like, what do you mean? I've never heard of rhythms. Do you mean like an S curve? I've done figure drawing, a contrapposto pose. He said, no, there's rhythms within the face. Have you seen the Frank Riley diagram about the rhythms of the face? And then he popped it up on his computer, which is this diagram right here. And so many of us that paint portraits were aware of the structure of the face. Some of the movements of some of the major rhythms from like the cheekbone up to the temple through the back of the head. But there are rhythms prevalent in every part of the anatomy, within figurative painting, within the human face, within nature, within landscapes, within animals. And rhythm is such an essential element to nature. You can veer way into the scientific realm of fractals and how everything in matter is composed of minute particles that form fractals, that form rhythms. It's where we get the golden mean, kind of the seashell shape that's repetitive in nature in every living thing. And there are documentaries on that, so I won't get into all of that detail. But in art, one of the essential things is, when we're painting a face and we're painting the features and trying to get it to look like the person, maybe first trying to get it to look human and then trying to get it to look like the person we're painting. When something isn't working, often it's a rhythm issue rather than a drawing issue. And probably 90% of the time when I correct a student's work in my class, and they'll think they can't draw or something's off. And some of my students are here, which is nice. It's not a drawing problem, it's a rhythm problem. And a rhythm problem can be a very small incremental angle change relating one part of the face to another part of the face. so that there's a fluid movement connecting two elements to the whole. As we all know, to this room, preaching to the choir of all painters, we get the gesture, we get the essence of the whole, and then we have to paint the parts to bring it in and flesh it out into reality. And the challenge in that is to not lose the integration of all the parts to the whole. It's very much, I think, a nice correlation is to think of art in relationship to music. All of the different elements that make up sound competent painting, no matter the subject, drawing, values, edges, composition, color temperature, design, all of those are like different instruments in an orchestra. And when played beautifully, they make a beautiful opus, composition, a piece of music. And they work individually, but they work together as a whole. And so we have to do the same thing. In a portrait, it would be the features within the whole entirety of the structure of the face. Within a landscape, it might be the tree, the mountain, the river that you're painting. But there has to be a cohesive wholeness to everything. So I'm going to break down a few elements here in some paintings. This is Sargent. And this is an excerpt from an article I wrote for the Portrait Society of America on rhythms. And so there are a couple different significant rhythms going on with this Sargent painting. One is a rhythm of form. So we can see the rhythm, the S curve, the movement of the pose, which makes it dynamic and interesting to look at in the middle picture. And then there's a rhythm of value in the right hand, and I've illuminated it so you can see it, a rhythm of white. And you can really see how strategically, not arbitrarily, he placed that handkerchief in the pocket to capture that rhythm. It keeps you engaged throughout the painting. Here's a close-up of the face. As we were talking about the Frank Riley diagram of the face, these are the certain rhythms that we see. We see naturally occurring in the face, the rhythms from eyebrow to eyebrow, eyelid to eyelid, cheekbone to cheekbone. So we mark it this way on our painting, but this is how we want to visualize it. We want to connect those shapes. And where they connect in those beautiful S curves, almost like an infinity sign with the eyes, is essential to getting the character of the portrait. If one of those rhythms is off, which it was in that portrait that I showed Morgan, it will look like the eye is drawn incorrectly, when in reality it's a simple angle change. And I'll show you that portrait a little later on to illustrate what I mean. Here's a photograph of a model I had in one of my classes, and I just drew over some of the essential rhythms. So you can see some of the diagrams from the Frank Riley head, but also there's rhythms within the shoulder, rhythms within the scarf, and that helps us determine what to emphasize and what to de-emphasize in our reference, whether it be reference from life or photographic reference. This is a painting of mine that I did of a young Alaskan girl. And again, I'm illustrating rhythms of form, but also rhythms of light, which is the rhythms of light and dark. And those are the areas I will know to put the greatest color in, the smaller brush work, areas of interest, to maximize the effect of rhythms in the painting. So this is the painting that I had showed Morgan. And this was in Portrait Society, the Certificate of Excellence. And like I said, I repainted, I think it was the left eye several times. And it was an eyebrow rhythm that was off by, I'm not kidding, like 1/10 of a centimeter or millimeter or something like that. And this rhythm I didn't have. I had the eyebrow going up too high and it missed that rhythm, which I drew. It was one stroke and it corrected the painting. And all of a sudden her eyes made sense, right? I didn't take a picture of it before, and I kind of wish I had so I could use it for educational purposes. Okay, so I'm going to go through some photos, and then we're going to look at some paintings. So, and I'm sorry, do you have any water or anything? My voice is crackling. Oh, there's one right here. Okay. I had some rowdy students this week that I had to really keep raising my voice. Okay, so this is a photograph I took in Alaska recently. And every painter in here can go, I can picture that as a painting, right? Nature creates rhythms. Rhythms is not something that's contrived, and I can't stress that enough. I don't believe in idealizing the figure. I don't believe in idealizing nature. I think people in their intricate uniqueness are beautiful, and as well as nature. It's all there. But when we go to paint it, we don't want to paint everything in sight like a photograph, because what's the point? You know, John Coleman, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with, says, we're not copy machines, right? So we're artists. We want to dissect and include only the most important elements. I like how Dan Gerhardt says it too. We want to paint things that make our heart beat faster, not just that copy nature. So I've mapped out what I consider the essential rhythms, and it all depends on your intention of what you want to create in your painting. But this is what, to me, I see nature presenting naturally. So if I do this on my reference, I will know what to subdue and what to enhance. That tells me along that rhythm line is where I will put the greatest amount of detail, the greatest amount of color temperature changes, nuances. The rhythm becomes part of my focal point. And, you know, this idea of bringing the focal point into play and slightly obscuring the rest of the painting also isn't a technique or a methodology. It's how the human eye sees. Now, I'm most interested in painting how the human eye sees personally for myself. And the human eye deems certain areas important and certain areas subordinate to those important areas. And how you determine the areas of importance, well, it's where your eye goes first on your subject. It's what you want to paint the most. And when you map it out as in your preliminary stages before you paint in the rhythms, the rhythm lines will give you that information as to where the most important focal points are. This is another photograph I took in Alaska this summer, taking some workshop students there, and again, mapping out some of the most important rhythms. And so you see the things that don't fall on the rhythm lines. Those are areas I may not emphasize because they would lead your eye right out of the painting. And we want the collector or the viewer to stay engaged with our painting and just not be able to tear themselves away, right? And Sargent was a master of that. Cecilia Bow, James Reynolds, Howard Turpnine, because they orchestrated certain things in a hierarchy of importance. Here's another photograph I took just right outside my studio in New Mexico that I do want to paint one of these days. And obvious rhythm is right here, right? That cloud is the star of the painting. Whether I keep it a landscape, whether I put someone on horseback, whether I put a person in there. And then when I map out the natural rhythms in the foreground, this is what I see. But does that enhance the prime rhythm that's the star of my painting? It doesn't, right? So we do want to be faithful to nature in certain areas, but you also want to remember to not let your reference be a master of you. You're the artist. You're the, orchestra conductor. You decide what's important. So to accentuate the rhythm up top that really I want to be my focal point, I would do the rhythm more like this, personally. And there's not a right or wrong. It's just a matter of intention of what you want to create, which means along this line, I might put a slightly lighter value. I might put some little color notes. One of the things I love about the James Reynolds paintings in the permanent collection is he would put little color temperature extreme notes in some of the rhythm areas of the painting in the focal point, color opposites that are the same value, like red and green or purple and yellow. And it just makes the painting sing, and it makes your eye travel through the painting. Sometimes nature just gives you perfect rhythms without you trying. I know this looks photoshopped. I took this on safari in Africa a couple years ago, and I planned to paint this. And these three little cubs, thankfully the mother wasn't nearby, and I got some good photos while I was going like this to make sure the mother wasn't coming. It's all laid out. There's this rhythm of the three cubs together, and they decided to just place themselves perfectly on the rocks to enhance these rhythms, the light and dark. You know, they could have been 2 feet over, but, I think they appreciated that we were artists, and, they just took care of the work, so That's a future painting. This is another future painting that, again, that I took on safari in Africa. These are just unretouched photos out, not photoshopped in any kind of way. And what's beautiful about this, now we know when a painting captures a beautiful composition, we feel it. And it's why we as artists, when we're taking reference or even setting up to paint the model, we'll do this, right? Back and forth, because we'll sense something, even if we can't articulate it. That rhythm connects the mother and the baby, and the side of her body with the ear. On a side note, we were the first humans to see this baby, and the baby started running towards us, and we're like, oh, and then the mother took her trunk and pulled it back, and we're like, oh. But it was very special. Again, nature makes it easy, right? Most of our job as artists is to be observant and just to be aware of the natural world and take in the beauty. So if and when I decide to paint this, I would be cognizant of these rhythms. And even, I didn't mark it, but there's this beautiful, almost halo around them because they were through this thicket, and that was just the natural light, Creation is so beautiful if we just pay attention. Again, this is in Alaska. I think he wanted his picture taken. Anyways, so now sometimes it's an S-curve, sometimes it's just a diagonal, but we can see obvious rhythms that make it a visually interesting painting. And I always, although I consider myself a realist or representational painter, I am drawn to the abstract because it's a nice, contrast to the realism, and they each enhance the other. But what would I paint and leave out here when you make those decisions? Well, I would emphasize things that go with the rhythm and then create that S-curve. That's where I would add some details, some color notes, and maybe de-emphasize things in the corner there on the left or the corner in the upper right. Again, this is one I positioned myself for. I loved the rhythm. It was just kind of very natural. You see that beautiful S-curve, always looking for S-curves in nature. I think it goes back to my days of figure drawing, and that's when I first saw it, and then you see it with the figure in the landscape. Now, you could put anything there. You could put a cowboy on a horse. You could put a group of people. You could put a lion. You could put a safari jeep. Anything there, but that is a good thing to keep in mind, even if this was just a landscape, where you might put your subject in your painting along that rhythm line. This was the Maasai chief that I painted him from life with a friend. We were teaching a workshop up in Kenya last year. And one of the things that I found so interesting about the regalia that they wear, that in some ways is very similar in some of the beadwork and coloring to our North American Native Indigenous people. And it's amazing cross-culturally, different continents, some of the similar artistic crafts that exist. But these big necklaces they wear, it's an arrow right up to the eye. Those are the things we want to look at. And so to keep that in mind, to be cognizant of that from the beginning, allows you to make sure that that lines up correctly. Because I don't really believe in copying the photo exactly, right? We always interpret. But if I were painting this, I would make sure that that necklace stays connected to that rhythm line. Now, that's not necessarily a rhythm line in nature. That's a compositional rhythm line, because there are different types of rhythm lines throughout art and throughout nature. Here I am mapping out all the different rhythms that I see that I would emphasize in the painting. And I've gotten to the point where I start to look at this and try to see this in my mind before I put the paint to canvas, right? And that gives you the information of what to emphasize, what to de-emphasize. This is that same little baby elephant from a different vantage point. And if I were going to paint this, it can be overwhelming with all the foliage and everything. What do I emphasize? Part of it, you first as an artist, of course, have to determine your intention for the piece. What is the most important part? This connection between mother and baby is the most important part to me. So that is where my eye would focus, and that becomes my focal point. And then secondary rhythms would be, I love the movement of the ears. Again, it creates kind of an S curve, infinity symbol, though on its side, which is very pleasing to the eye and goes back to the golden mean, which you can research online, and some of the traditional compositional elements of art through the ages. Another photo I took in Africa of a leopard, and now if I were to paint this, I have no interest in painting everything like a photograph, but I would want to show the animal in their environment. So what areas of the tree would I emphasize? Well, first, I want to map out the rhythms of my main subject. Now you could replace this leopard with a human in a flower garden or in a forest, and you would be going about it with the same process. I would emphasize the areas that complete my rhythms and create an interesting design. Okay, so here's one that's an interesting photograph, right? And I love that it tells a narrative, and it is something that I'd like to paint. Again, how would I complete the rhythms? There's not really a rhythm connecting the animal to the subject. And I don't want to just rely on the subject to carry the story. I do want to use my tools as an artist to make it visually compelling. This is one option of a rhythm, and it could be putting a slightly lighter value in, and I'm saying very incremental, not even a half a value stop, or maybe a little bit more chroma in the notation, so the eye goes along that line, and the viewer may not even realize that they're following this rhythm line. It's very, very subtle, because if you overdo it, it could look too contrived. There's another way I could do it, right? So there's no right or wrong way. There are undeniable analytical rhythms in the human form or in anatomy, but when it comes to composition, it's about what story you want to tell. So, yes, these guys were so cute. So these were the first baby lions that I saw in Africa. And I love that they were kind of in this thicket, and they were so curious, and there's so much of a narrative there. But my essential narrative that I'm responding to, you guys can all see it because you're artists, but the average person, if you paint every blade of grass and every bit of that photograph, they're going to lose that intention. So these are the essential rhythms to me if I were mapping it out. The rhythms of the grass is important. I liked how the grass was moving around and circling around them. I liked that lead-in line of the grass there, and how beautifully that the rhythm of the body of the little cub on the right comes down and cascades and catches the rhythm of the elbow of the one on the left. And those are the little things to look out for. And so, for example, how that rhythm goes from one cub to the other, if you're drawing the cubs and that rhythm, instead of being like this, I'll just illustrate with my hands, goes like this, it's not going to look right, and you're going to lose that rhythm, and you'll be wondering as an artist, and I'm speaking from experience, like, why isn't it working? It works in my foot, why isn't it working? And it's really just shifting it like so. And it could be a brush stroke, it could be a touch of the anatomy. So let's translate that into the human form. This was a young lady that modeled for my class when I was teaching in Tuscany, Italy. Fun fact, we're invited to paint at the house they used in Gladiator in the movie. And so we sat out there, and one of the techie students in my class streamed the Gladiator music. It was really fun. So anyways, but I wanted to show you, how does this translate into a figure, right? Here are some of the rhythms that I'm seeing mapped out. Some of them are form, exist in nature, the side of her face down, cascading around her torso. Some of them is the position of her arm. This also tells me where to put detail in the necklace, where to put detail in the sleeve, right? This sleeve in the foreground is more important than that sleeve in the background because it completes the rhythms. And when you do that, the viewer will pull their eye through the composition and go right up to the eye, which is the thing you want, and then they'll flow back through the composition as well. That rhythm really goes nicely. That one fold, let me go back so you can see. So I wanted to illustrate that since it's all painters here, where sometimes we'll start painting detail and we won't think about getting that exact movement. We'll just paint maybe it more straight and up and down, right? Thinking we're just painting a shadow on the far side of the arm. But the way that curves, see that connects up in an S curve. So paying attention to angles and being cognizant of that throughout the process. Okay, this is a photograph, a portrait of Edward Curtis himself. We all know of his photographs. There's one here in the permanent collection, which is beautiful. Such an amazing photographer, and he utilized many of these things, these elements of rhythms throughout his work. And you can see the rhythm of light, you know, an S curve right here through the composition. And as a photographer, perhaps he manipulated and pushed that shadow back further, things that we do similar in painting, right, and in drawing. This is a quick figure drawing, 5 minutes. Kind of scary to see a 5-minute drawing so large, but but here are the rhythms that I'm looking for within the figure. There are rhythms especially through the hips on women, through the shoulders on men, the, you know, beautiful rhythms that connect the body. That tells us the things we need to emphasize, especially when you have a limited amount of time, like a 5-minute sketch. Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
Hot water with honey in it. We didn't have lemon, but I brought it.
Oh, that is perfect. Thank you. Till my voice is getting a little scratchy. Actually, my students they were the best group of students, but we got all excited and talked aloud and just had a ball. So it's like being at a 4-day party where we did art. Okay, so this is Rosa Bonheur. If you're not familiar with this artist from France from the turn of the century, go look her up right away because she's extraordinary. Some of you might be more familiar with her work than her name. If you've been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that giant painting that's the size of this whole wall called the Horse Fair, multiple horses, that's by her. And so this painting of a lion, she actually had a pet lion, but I'll let you research that online. Really, really cool woman. This is where I mapped out, there's a beautiful rhythm of light. And it's kind of an unconventional rhythm of light, right? It's like a small, like almost like a river of S-curves. And that emphasizes to me the dignity and the presence of this lion. We all knew who this is, Sargent. So this is from the recent Sargent in Fashion exhibit in Boston. And, you know, I love all of Sargent's work. He's one of my favorite painters. This painting stopped me in my tracks. And I just stared at it. And I'm serious. Probably I kept coming back to it. The guard kicked me out of the museum at 10 o'clock. And I must have stood in front of it for a couple hours because it was such an economy of brushwork and of value, and such a masterclass in rhythms and the economy of the rhythm, but the power of the rhythm. Obvious S-curve rhythm that goes throughout, right? This rhythm of light. Then this stroke, I'm going to go back so you can see it without the mark. That one stroke that was done in one brush stroke is an arrow, a rhythmical arrow going straight to her hand. So when you look at this, you may not think about that rhythm, but man, your eye goes from her face down to her hand, catches that stroke, goes back up. It's just incredible. And if you'd put that stroke pointing in a different direction slightly, which it might have been in the photo reference, or he did use some photos, but in the model, in his reference, I think he would have changed it and intentionally changed it to this. And that's where rhythms can be malleable when it's fabric or like the feathers of the hat, right? It just connects beautifully. There's also these rhythms of form that continue up through the hat and down through the cape. And it's a little difficult to see in here, but there are these angles that he has in the background of dark that merge into light, and I illuminated them with the arrows, and those also point to the rhythms to direct your eye to them. This beautiful painting is by an Indiana artist, and I am forgetting his name right now. I apologize. But he is a fantastic artist. I've always loved this painting, and I wanted to show you some examples of even like a more realistic painting, tighter painting that still captures beautiful rhythms. This rhythm of light through the head and down to the shoulder, that's really a form rhythm that exists on every human being. But the artist chose to illuminate that by light, and so it emphasizes the rhythms in a beautiful way. Also, the rhythm of light on the shoulder, where does it go? Right up to the eye. And it's maybe difficult to see, or maybe just for me because I have the light on my face, but there's this shadow right here off his cheekbone that is going in the same angle of the rhythms there and directs you up to the eye. Again, rhythm of anatomy, rhythm of form. This is Cecilia Beau, a contemporary of John Singer Sargent. I love this double portrait. This double portrait actually inspired my first double portrait. That was my first time of being a finalist in the Portrait Society of America. I love the idea of a double portrait where one subject is engaging the viewer and the other is supportive, and the movement of fabric and design that he created throughout this, or that she created throughout this, is just beautiful. Cecilia Beau, as well as Sargent's, and they were contemporaries and painted together, were just masters of rhythms of light, rhythms of form, rhythms of color. And I've mapped out some of these rhythms, and even as subtle as the placement of the chair, drawing your eye down to the movement of the dress. And this is sometimes these things we don't think about, and we need to think about because they can make or break a painting. And you could easily paint that chair a little to the right, a little to the left, and not capture that rhythm. And then you might say, well, why is that chair there? What purpose does it serve? This links them to the environment and creates a beautiful movement, as well as the collar. I'm going to go back to where there are no arrows. That collar, realistically on her, on the fur collar of the girl on the right, could have been a little bit higher or lower, right? Sometimes the rhythm doesn't happen exactly where we want it to, but it's easy to move. Cecilia Beau popped that rhythm to draw your eye right up to the eye. And knowing her work and reading her autobiography, which is fantastic, by the way, I can bet she did that intentionally. So Bouguereau, this little head study is, to me, even more compelling than some of his finished work, although I love all of his finished work as well. There are two really beautiful rhythms when you look here, and one is from that shoulder, that S curve right up to the eye. And it follows that rhythm line of the cheek and the swell of the cheek that exists, on every human being. And then this rhythm from the back of the head to the shoulder, Part of this is created by the master artist himself, to me, through our physical form and face and the movements. But we can analyze it and know what to emphasize and just what to bring to life in a painting that makes it the most compelling portrait that you could do with your subject matter. There's another rhythm throughout the ear and the jaw. And this is why it's helpful to have that diagram, where the rhythm is mapped out. But you can see it, even if you're not aware of it. If you know to look for it, you will start to see it everywhere in nature and be able to implement it into your paintings. Another Sargent painting, beautiful quick study. And Sargent and Cecilia Beau both were known for the intentionality of every brushstroke. Everything serves a purpose, nothing is wasted. And we can see some of the design choices he made create a beautiful rhythm, a slight different angle on even like the shadow of the fabric on the torso could undo that beautiful S curve that we look for in portrait and figure work, and also landscapes. And the little 3 dots is where I put to illustrate how we want to look and draw through. You know, when I took figure drawing back at Art Center College of Design in California, they would tell us to just leave our pencil on the paper and maybe lift it to not make a mark, but follow the rhythm line with your whole arm up, and then you press back in and connect it. I do that often in painting. Rather than making those separate strokes, just lift your brush off the canvas a little bit and then catch the rhythm in the rest of the composition. It connects and makes things cohesive with one another. How are we doing on time? I didn't time. I think we're good, right? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So, you know, here's an N.C. Wyeth, just a beautiful painting. I love the limitation of the composition. The choice of the birds up there is so genius to me, and I'm a huge fan of his work. There's an amazing one in the permanent collection here, because that's an arrow pointing right down. It's very subtle. You don't notice it at first. You notice the other part of the rhythm first. Little things like that can keep your eye engaged beautifully within the composition. And then there's the obvious rhythm that we see. Everything points to this man, and the emptiness of space conveys the narrative of the solitary. I believe it's called Shipwrecked. Caleb, you probably know, right? Is it called Shipwrecked? Yeah. Okay, Sargent, right? Beautiful. This is a busier composition than Sargent is normally known for. And it took him many years to paint as he painted it from life. And there are several different rhythms throughout. A painting isn't just one rhythm, because there can be a rhythm of form as an anatomy, and I didn't take the time to map that out in this. Then there can be a rhythm of light and dark. There can be a rhythm of color. So let's look at the general rhythm of color, right? And light, the lanterns, and how that moves in an interesting way through the painting. You can see why he wouldn't put a lantern way down on the bottom that would come down like a direct angle off the corner of the painting. This has a beautiful feel to it when we just look at the rhythm line. There's also this rhythm of white, right? The white of the flowers, the white of the dresses cascading down, the careful placement of the flowers at the bottom to continue those rhythms. There's also a rhythm of pink throughout there. It's multi-layered, and that's where it reminds me of a symphony orchestra. Maybe one, you know, this could be the wind instruments, this could be the brass, you know, that kind of thing. And it's layered and it makes music, and it's just so visually compelling. So this artist that I wrote down their name and promptly left that note at home is a Russian artist, and really amazing. I love this work, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name offhand. But this to me is a masterclass in rhythms. It's beautifully painted. But what makes it just so breathtaking to me are some of the amazing rhythms. One, the standard S curve that we look for in figurative work. Look where that rhythm line catches the red that he's put down there. There's also another rhythm line through the form, and he follows along that red, and then that curve of her shirt, right? He could have painted that fold any way, but I'm sure he either adjusted or manipulated it to fall within a beautiful rhythm. Again, leads your eye up through the face. Emphasizing the pose, emphasizing the gesture, and the gesture is where the lifeblood of a portrait, be it person, animal, figurative, is. It's not in the details. It's not even in the features. It's in the movement and the gesture to make it appear like the person just stopped moving or paused between heartbeats, so to speak. This rhythm of form is really beautiful as well, and where he chose to place the red on the sleeve See that red on the far sleeve? That's like an arrow to me. As an artist, I see it, but a non-artist probably wouldn't see it. They would just move their eye in that direction. And that's how we want to utilize it in painting. I want it to be personally subtle, like a wonderful director of a movie subtly shifts your attention to where he wants to take you in the story and the narrative. As artists, we do the same. So we want to be thinking about that. And when we decide where to put color, where to put value, where to put chroma. There's this other beautiful rhythm that follows the other arm down and the red design on the other part of the sleeve. Wouldn't be as effective if the red design was on the outside of the sleeve, and it could have easily turned that way. But whether it was that way in nature or the artist choose to make it that way to complete the rhythms, we don't know, but it's beautiful, the choices that they made. So I'm going to look at a couple of Richard Schmid paintings. You guys know that, many of you know that I studied with him. This is us painting in his studio. Rhythmical elements in a painting is something Richard Schmid was a master of. To take a busy scene like this painting and to make your eye just flow through it in a purposeful way is just, he was a master of rhythms. Emphasizing some of the rhythms here, the S curves, you can see where he chose to put just that rhythm of yellow. This to me is a rhythm of yellow, a rhythm of light. Any different placement of those leaves up there would make the rhythm go off a bit. But here, it's just beautiful. It's so visually compelling. I would see Richard often do this in landscapes where he would leave some of the underpainting or create a lead-in line or texture of a rhythm of light or value that leads your eye to the composition. You can see this overlaying the rhythmical strokes over his brushwork. It leads your eye right up there and completes it going into the mountains and the edge of the mountains and passes right through that focal point of the house. All of these supporting elements of lighter paint that are flowing kind of act like arrows that point your way to the rhythm line. So in this painting, also by Richard Schmid, you can see the obvious rhythm in the front, right? And he actually painted that in there to draw your eye, and it's very direct. But the more subtle rhythms that you see, this points up to the tower and up through the cloud. Now if we step back right here to where, let me go backwards, where it points to the tower, there's the hardest edge in the painting, right there with the tower, with the trees behind. The greatest area of contrast, the hardest edge in the painting. Probably if we saw it in person, the greatest area of color. There's probably little increments of yellow and purple in there to emphasize that contrast. And then even the choice of the placement of the clouds. I mean, it's there. And we saw that in nature in the safari jeep photo I showed you from Africa. But here is where you can implement it in a painting, and it's just stunning. Even that shape, that blue shape, acts like an arrow pointing to the rhythm line. So everything serves a purpose, and Richard and Sargent had that in common. Here's an amazing Cecilia Bow painting. This painting is in Washington, D.C., and it will probably my favorite painting of Cecilia Bow's, and there's just beautiful rhythms throughout here. Now, one of the things Cecilia Bow was a master of rhythms of color and chromatic color. She would emphasize pure chroma in areas along the rhythm line of form of her compositions. This is the natural rhythm that I see, right? Down the design, down the arm, the fold of the arm, anatomical rhythm, up to the cat, up to, it follows exactly the curve of the chair, and then up to the face. And along these areas, she put pure, it looks, I would bet, pure cad red right out of the tube. In the cat's face, in the gentleman's face, right? In the hand. And Even that cad red in the hand, you notice it's not anywhere else in the hand. It's along the rhythm line, right? So this shows me, I believe, when I talked to Morgan and he first told me about rhythms, he said as a former illustrator, and there are a lot of former illustrators in our beautiful fine art here at the booth, that was something that they were taught in school. I really, really strongly suspect that at the turn of the century, the schools where Sargent and Cecilia Bow taught and the artists that were trained at that time period, they discussed rhythms, they implemented rhythms, they looked for it, they manipulated it to create the greatest, most breathtaking sense of life in their paintings and not get bogged down with superfluous detail. Okay, and here's our last painting, St. George, and this is at the Met. Oh, forgive the white dot in the center. I had to grab this off of Pinterest, and they put that on there. So you can't make a print, but so just ignore the bright white dot. But I love this composition. When I first saw this painting, I just stood in front of it for so long. I didn't have the knowledge at 20 years old when I saw this as to why I loved it. And that will happen when a non-artist looks at your painting and you implement rhythms of form, color, and light and value. They won't know why they love it, but they won't be able to tear their eyes away. And I couldn't tear my eyes away from this. Now, with many years of painting under my belt, I can see this beautiful rhythm of white, right? A rhythm of light. And he emphasized color and edges and form throughout there. And it also curves down right towards the face, which is very important to the portrait. It also curves around, if I complete that S, up to the eye of the horse. And even the choice, I'm going to go back one, even the curve of the tree, which seems like it could be arbitrary, right? He could have painted that tree straight up and down, but would that have intersected the primary rhythm line? No. Just to curve it just a little bit. If I were to keep drawing, it would connect that arrow to the arrow pointing up to the horse's eye. Anyways, that was my last slide, and I hope this gives you a good understanding of rhythms and just a curiosity about them to look in nature. Some of you might be implementing it in your painting already, but just be aware of it. Look for it when you're composing and creating your preliminary studies for a painting. Be very aware of it because that can really push your painting to the next level and make it just visually compelling to the viewer. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. I'm happy to answer some questions. Wow, I didn't time it and we ended right at 7, so it's good. Yes.
And there really wasn't a strong light source.
Yes.
Do you ever enhance that when you work on it, or do you allow it to stay? Like, what was your initial thought?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I couldn't control the light, of course, and it's just a completely raw picture that I haven't edited. But if I were painting it, I would emphasize the light along the rhythm line, just subtly. If we do it too much, it can look, unnatural because it was an overcast day. But if I subtly emphasize the light along there, subtly emphasize the composition and design, the anatomy, the brushwork, the color notations, the chroma, everything subtly, it will have a great impact. If I overdo it too much, it can look forced.
I think it's an interesting way to adapt to that kind of almost the flatness because all the colors are so similar.
Yes.
And then you look at that rhythm line and you're like, well, that's where I'm going to push it, and it makes so much more sense.
And that'll create depth. And when I actually took that photograph, it reminded me of there's a Sargent painting at the Met called The Hermit, where the man is hidden and the deer is hidden in this beautiful array of shapes that's all in overcast light. But you look at it and you are aware of the abstract, and then you become aware of the trees, and then you see the man, and then you see the deer. And it's really interesting, and it's very different from any other Sargent painting I've ever seen. But he utilized, I could tell, rhythms to point the way to the essential elements. Otherwise, you might have missed those because they really camouflaged in with the surrounding, you know? Yeah, Caleb. I knew you guys would have good questions.
Sir, I'm going to hand you this microphone to use. So that people on Zoom can hear us.
From a fairly early age, I recognized that there were such strong rhythms emphasized, especially in the plains of grass and things in Richard's paintings.
Yeah.
And was that something he overtly kind of talked about, or was that something he just kind of left you to figure out on your own?
You know, he didn't talk about rhythms a lot, but he did talk about lead-in lines and drawing the viewer's eye, and I think that was his way of thinking about rhythms. I think he really, quite honestly, was very instinctual about it, and to a degree beyond the average person. And what I mean is that I feel everyone sees rhythms, because otherwise we'd take a camera and just go click. We wouldn't do this. And even if we can't articulate why it is we move 6 inches to the right to take a picture, we're feeling something, right? And I think our internal nature, our artistic sensitivities respond to seeing rhythms. And so that's why we choose to take one picture over another. I think Richard very instinctually added it into his paintings because he would feel it. From my talks with him, yeah.
In nature, there's always the primary rhythms. Usually, in the structure of a person or the landscape, there's the structure that's always has one rhythm, and then light is creating another one. There's always a dominant, and then and secondary and contrasting rhythms.
Yes.
Could you talk about balancing those or emphasizing how you choose which way to go?
Sure, and just a note to kind of piggyback on your last question with this new one is that, Richard was like a consummate figure painter. I mean, he painted figures so much. This was before the time when I studied with him and met him and knew him, but he did many nude figure paintings, figure drawings, and that is the best way to see rhythms. So that's where I first kind of became aware of it. I didn't label it rhythms, but I felt it, and I implemented it into my drawings and paintings before I ever heard about the idea of rhythms in that illustrative way from Morgan. And I recognized it, but I didn't know what it was, and I couldn't tell when it was missing. I just knew it felt right when I hit it, And so I kind of went on a quest looking at other paintings and just thought, why am I responding to this painting over this one? And then I would find that the one I responded to had beautiful rhythms, and the elements of the painting were orchestrated to that rhythm. And so one of the things Kayla mentioned is contrasting rhythms. I feel like the Sargent painting, Lily, Lily, Rose, Carnation, Lily, Lily, Rose, of the two children with the lanterns, had some intersecting, contrasting rhythms, right? Rhythm of light, rhythm of pink, rhythm of white. There were even rhythms of dark in there. And there are many other Sargent paintings, but we would be here for several hours if I posted them all, where one is most notably of the people in the Alps laying on the grass. And they're this congregation of artists. And it looks like he just painted his friends outdoors. When I saw the photos that he took, black and white for reference, they didn't have the same rhythms as the painting. And that made me realize, why did he change certain things? When I saw that painting in person last year, I could see that he had a rhythm of light in one diagonal and a rhythm of dark in another diagonal, a rhythm of green, a rhythm of white, and they contrasted and they created like this X shape throughout the painting, which just made it visually interesting. And the photo reference I saw in an art book of his didn't have that. So, and the more I've studied Sargent's in person, the more I've realized, of course, he was an excellent draftsman and could have painted or drawn everything exactly like he saw it in nature. But again, that would be copying nature, not interpreting nature, with an intention to, dazzle the eye and inspire, the mind. And so I've seen many times in many paintings of Sargent where he's changed the drawing to make the rhythms dominant. And one most notably, I don't have a picture of it here, but if you look on my Facebook or Instagram, I did a copy of these hands of a Sargent painting of Mrs. Edward Darley Boyd at the Boston Museum of Art. And as I'm painting it, I'd looked at this painting many times. Every time I went to Boston, I kind of made a field trip to go have tea with Sargent and look at this painting. And I didn't notice until I was actually painting it that he made one finger 1.5 inches longer than it should be, and one finger 1 inch shorter than it should be. And I know he's an excellent draftsman, so I had to say, well, why did he do that? Because it created this beautiful U-shaped rhythm, and if that finger was the appropriate length, each finger, your eye would have done this instead of done this. And that painting was a masterclass in rhythms. And it's one of the things I encourage you to look for, because it is in nature, in the face, in the human figure. It's in nature in, you can go out and see, the way the mountains and the river and, everything composes itself. But again, you'll feel it in one spot and maybe you move 3 feet to the right or the left, and then you won't feel it there. That's because where you feel it is where you're catching and seeing that beautiful rhythm. So it's once we see it in nature, we can choose when to emphasize it in our paintings. Any other questions? Oh, sure.
How or when do you know you have completed a painting, and what factors do you check before you complete?
Well, that's such an easy question. I'm being facetious. I'm going to steal the answer that I learned it from, which is from Richard. A painting is finished when it looks like what you want it to look like. It's that simple, He used to also say when the check clears, but, I know he was just joking. So when it looks like what you want it to look like, right? It's easier said than done. Often we get lost in trying to make a painting look good when everyone's definition of good or perfection is different, right? So, we know as artists, no matter what we do, we're going to get some criticism, so we might as well do what we want, right? But in all seriousness, one of the things, and my students can attest to, that I repeat ad nauseum constantly through my workshops that I teach is, what is your intention for this painting on this particular day? And you need to have a definite intention. It's not enough to get in front of your subject, be it a model or a landscape or whatever, and say, I just want it to turn out good. There's nothing to grasp in that, right? So, to me, the secret of doing great art is to know thyself, right? That old adage of know thyself, and think, what do I want to create today? You don't have to paralyze yourself thinking, what do I want to create for the rest of my life? And everything has to be cohesive and all of that. I don't honestly believe in that. We're growing, evolving human beings, having multiple human experiences through the years of our life, and our paintings will change. And some days we'll feel like painting more realistic or more impressionistic or, in a different medium. And I think we need to honor that authenticity in ourselves. And that's something that I really respected about Richard Schmid and Sargent, because they didn't paint the same way every time. It depended upon how they were moved by the subject. And so the key question is, what do I want it to look like, and what is my intention? And for me, I dissect that down to, what do I want to capture in my subject? What is the story I'm wanting to tell? Now, when we think story and narrative, sometimes that can be a little paralyzing. It doesn't have to be like an epic novel story in a painting. There are paintings like that that are absolutely beautiful, right? But I always say in my classes that a painting can be a poem, a short story, or a novel, and all are beautiful. I wouldn't compare, a Mary Oliver beautiful stanza of poetry in 3 lines against Dostoevsky, right? But they're both beautiful. They're both equally beautiful. So there are many different ways that we can paint that are valid painting. And I think we just have to be intentional about what we want to create. Once we harness the intention and we implement that throughout the painting process, I think we'll know when it's done because we'll have met that intention. To me, it's like a kind of internal oven timer that's like, ding, I've got the thing I want, right? Where you know no amount of detail is going to, or no amount of further painting is going to enhance what you want to say. And then if you haven't said what you want to say in the painting, you know to keep going and figuring it out. So I hope that answers that question.
I have a question for the audience. Sure. Who all is going to be up all night going through your stacks of paintings? You can text me at 2 a.m. and we can compare notes.
Yeah, I'd say just a last thing I'd say is if there's any painting that you're working on to kind of add a caboose to that question, and it's close to what you want and you feel like it's not working, the first thing I would check are the rhythm lines, and the rhythm lines follow your intention. Check that because often it's one subtle brush stroke and then there it is, right? So.
I'm not kidding. I'm going to be up all night. Feel free to text me. 2 a.m. We'll talk.
Text her, don't text me, but you
Yeah,
can
get
replay the
some
video.
rest. You get some rest. That was amazing. Thank you so very much.
So
We are
welcome. It's
so
such a joy to
honored.
be here.
We're so honored and appreciative and grateful for sharing what you did, and what a wonderful presentation. Just
Thank you,
again.
Brenda. Thank you. And thank you guys for coming out. I know there was a lot of rain and craziness the past couple days, so I appreciate seeing all of you. Of course. Should we direct us in the light?
Is that good, Tim?
Give me your hand, darling. Oh, this is for my, just hiding this. Wait just a minute. I just want to hold your hand. Precious.
Now get one.
Giving me some super poses here.
Oh my gosh.
I wish we had a little bit more time together. That was a You're precious.
Bright lights.
And I hope that just randomly, I really got that.
If we had time, I would have done it in class.
I really got this. This really clicked with me. I really know that. I understand that. That's really amazing. Didn't we have a good time? We had a great time. Did you come back and get your fish? I sent you a voice. I got it.
You look like you should be in a sergeant. She looks like she should be in a sergeant.
Listen, take out the
That was wonderful. That was wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Stuff that we had before on the This is embroidery.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
No, it's okay.
Very nice to meet you.
This is my husband, Bill.
We're getting slower by the day. Yes. Hey, Bill, tell me how. Bill Trump. Phil, good to meet you, sir. Yeah.
She's the one I told you about with the double pistols. Yeah. And the boots. She loves boots. That's something we have in common. Cowboy boots. Yep. And tell me here what state you're from. Louisiana.
Yes. I just hosted our Super Bowl.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we drove up here to watch
Well,
it.
it was about 40 miles from us.
Hey, what now?
We had to drive up here to watch
Had
the
to
Super
watch
Bowl
it.
down.
We're going to take my granddaughter and 5 of her friends to Mardi Gras this year, though. That should be interesting.
Hey, where?
Mardi Gras.
Oh my goodness.
Well, it's a birthday, graduation I'm gonna put those luggage tags in each one of their purses. Seriously, you know, just
That'd be a good idea.
just in case. The world is crazy.
Oh, it's a crazy world we live in. Well, you folks been taking your way back.
Where are y'all from?
So driving all the way from Louisiana, we're up in the North Georgia mountains.
Oh,
It's about
okay.
2 hours. Not too far. Way up in the mountains. Charlie, bye. See y'all. Let me give you a hug. You were quiet.
Ah.
Yeah, you know? Oh, was I supposed to? There you go. It was in one of yours. Well, no, I got that. Well, it's just so weird. It's all fine. It's like, I have such a short memory. I hope so. I tried to eat them on this one.
So now, when you folks try to drive back in one day, oh, that's not bad at all. That's not bad.
We get on the interstate, we're out here, we'll get off the interstate till we like get to the house.
We're probably close to 3 hours, so it's not bad for us. And
You know, it's easier to drive than it is to fly. By the time we drove an hour to New Orleans, got there an hour early, flew an hour up here.
hour at the airport, you could drive it.
And had my car here.
It don't matter if you're going out of the country or wherever, it takes a day to travel. That's what I tell my wife. I said, it don't matter if we're going to Florida or if we're going to California. It's going to take a day. If we're going to fly there or drive there. You know?
Yeah.
One day is lost. One day is lost. I'm just glad to see the sunshine today. We've had a few days of rain. Oh my goodness. We had some flooding up in the mountains in different
Oh, I
places.
wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
My son's in the Army. He was over in Western North Carolina. They sent him over there. And he was laughing. He wasn't laughing. He said, you don't understand. We're flat. Okay. A lot of rain falls. It builds up like that. Eventually,
It goes out, it runs off.
you get in the mountains, it's coming down.
It creates some force.
It's coming down. And he said when he was in Afghanistan, he said if they heard that there was like a 1/4 inch of rain up in the mountains around them, they were doing everything they could to get ready for it.
Because it's so much water by the time it gets in those,
To the valley.
yeah, those valleys, narrow valleys.
They were ready to be in 3 feet of water. Wow. Crazy.
So is your son still in the, is he still in the army?
Still in the Army. He's,
We need a good man in there.
I tell you, it's